Many of us think that it's impossible to find meaning, purpose, and even joy again after a devastating loss. That's what I thought on November 8th, 2000, when my 17-year-old daughter Leah died. Travel back with me to November 3rd of that year. It was a Friday, like every other Friday. At the time, I was working as a project manager for a large contracting company. My office was in a job site trailer. About mid-morning, the police came into my office and asked me if I was Nancy Leffler. When I said yes, they told me that my daughter Leah had been in an accident and was in the hospital, and they were there to take me there. I asked them what had happened, and they either wouldn't or couldn't tell me. I grabbed up all of my things and rushed off with them. On the way, I called my husband Dan, and he made plans to meet us there. I again asked them what had happened and received no answer. When we arrived at the hospital, we were met by Leah's principal and her guidance counselor. They had grim looks on their faces, and they told us that Leah had been in a car accident and had hit the only tree in the middle of a cornfield, and that she was in surgery. We were led to the surgical waiting room, and I could not sit down. I was shaking uncontrollably, trying to imagine what had happened and what this might mean for us. We called our son, who was in college at the time, and he made plans to join us. When the surgeon finally came out, he told us that Leah had massive brain injuries and that she was in a medically induced coma to reduce brain swelling. They also told us that she was puffy from surgery and that we might not recognize her. All I wanted to do was to see my daughter. To me, she was going to be still my daughter. When we walked into the room, I walked over to her bedside, placed my hand on her shaved head, caressed it, and told her that I loved her. I also told her that her friends had begun arriving and that they were anxious to see her and to be with her again. And we began what was the last 5 days of her life. After about 5 days, they told us that she hadn't had any brain activity for several days. And we were being called to make a very difficult decision, the most difficult decision we've ever had to make. Before we made that decision, though, we invited all of her friends and our friends who had been gathering at the hospital to say goodbye to Leah, if they wanted to. And just about everybody did. They went in one or two at a time and said their goodbyes to their good friend. Something no 17 or 18-year-old should ever have to do. When I left the hospital on the night that my daughter died, I thought my life was over. I had no idea how I was going to get from that moment to the next moment, let alone to where I am today. All I wanted to do was to pull the covers up over my head and never emerge. I found that when I did go to sleep, every time I woke up, I would have to remember yet again that Leah was no longer here. I didn't want to take a shower or get dressed. I didn't want to see anybody. And there were some days when I thought if I ate enough chocolate chip cookies that I would never have to feel the pain of losing my daughter. My feelings were so overwhelming and intense. And they all came at me at once. I didn't know what to do. About 2 weeks after she died, I received this powerful message. Losing Leah is too high a price to pay to not live the life that I was meant to live, to not be who I was meant to be. Now, in that moment, I had no idea how I was going to do that, how I was going to find the life I was meant to live. But I knew that in order to honor my daughter, that I was going to have to do exactly that. My grief journey became about excavating that life, digging deep under all the feelings, the raw, devastating feelings, to see what that life was. The other message I received that same day is that everything I had done up until that point had prepared me for what was coming next. One of the first things I did was to turn to a practice that was already a part of my life at the time. The first indication of that second message. It was a present moment awareness practice called samyama, and it helped me to be with the stories, or with the feelings rather, without the stories. My head was spinning all kinds of stories, all the what ifs and the if onlys. If only I had been a better mother, I could have kept her safe. But what if I hadn't gone to work that day? We could have gone shopping. And on and on and on. My head liked to slice and dice all the events of that day to come up with a different outcome. And that wasn't going to happen. As I began to bring my feelings into my heart, they began to shift. I began to move through them. I found that every time I was able to hold a difficult feeling, an uncomfortable feeling, a painful feeling in my heart, that I would receive blessings and grace. Every single time. I began to see these blessings and grace as gifts. When this first started happening, I was appalled. I didn't deserve to receive gifts. My daughter was dead. And yet it kept happening. Here's a few examples. One day I went to the mailbox and there was a lilac in the mailbox. Now, lilacs are one of my favorite flowers, but they didn't grow very well where we lived at the time. I knew for a fact that there were no lilac bushes in the neighborhood that we lived in. That didn't stop me, though, from taking that lilac and walking around the neighborhood trying to discover that lilac bush. Because how else would a lilac have ended up in my mailbox? Another time I was driving around town and I needed gas. I pulled into the gas station. I saw another car pull in, and it was Leah's favorite math teacher, Mrs. Anderson. She got out of her car and we hugged. We hadn't seen each other for about 2 years at that point. And she told me about changes she had made in her life, about how her priorities had changed because of knowing Leah. We would also often hear stories about Leah from her friends, about how she was always the one they called first because they knew that Leah would always listen to them. And I hold these stories close to my heart because they told me a little bit more about my daughter. When I saw how powerful samyama was at helping me to process my own grief, I was called to be certified as a samyama practitioner, and I did that in January of 2009. Now, at the time, I was still working that corporate job, and I was seeing clients on the side. About 75% of the clients were grief clients. And I wasn't offering samyama for grief at the time. I was offering it as a resource for daily living. And yet, I was already being prepared for my future life. Eventually, I did leave that corporate job. And I didn't begin seeing clients immediately. I did a few other things to prepare me. I went through some of my own things. I created a program for myself. And when I felt like I was ready, I began to offer that program to other people. Here's just a few of the things that I utilize in my work with my clients. Samyama is the basis of that work, and we always start there. But another thing that we talk about is gratitude. Because we don't think we have anything to be grateful for right after the death of a loved one. But we always have things to be grateful for. Even in difficult times, we can be grateful for clean water to drink, or good nourishing food to eat, or a bed to rest in, and hopefully get some sleep in. So start where we are. And research shows that gratitude affects our brain chemistry. Another one is self-care, or what I've begun calling self-love. Now, there's a lot written about self-care, but what does it look like in early grief? It may be making sure that we have enough nourishing food to eat, and we're not filling up on chocolate chip cookies all day. Or that we're moving, we're getting out into the sunlight. Self-care changes as we change and as we grow. So what are our non-negotiable self-care or self-love rituals that help us to get in touch with who we are? Creativity was another really important one for me. Creativity put me back in touch with the essence of who I've always been and with who I was as I walked through my grief journey. So what are some of the things that put you in touch with the essence of who you are? For me, it was artwork, but it can be anything: gardening, cooking, anything that puts you in touch with who you are. Even just living your life in a creative way. As I began to see clients and use some of these techniques and strategies with them, I thought, I've done it. This is the life that I was meant to live. I have made it. And that's when I heard, it's time to write your book. And I said, no, I am not an author. I'm not going to write such a vulnerable story for everybody to read. It's not going to happen. No. I continued to resist writing my book until it was just easier to write the thing. I found a writing coach, and he gave me 10 days worth of prompts. He said, write one prompt a day, 1,000 words, and send them to me. At the end of the 10 days, we'll have a phone conversation. And one of the things I asked him going into it is that, do I really have a book? I didn't think I did. In our phone conversation, he told me, not only do you have a book, but it needs to be a physical book that you can put into someone's hands. And I thought, okay. Up until that time, I thought, well, everybody writes ebooks. I'll write an ebook, and it can live wherever ebooks live, and I don't have to really have something physically that has my name on it to prove that I'm an author. So I said, okay, I'm in. He told me how to write my first big, fat, messy draft, which I did. After I did that, we went over each chapter, and he gave me a structure for each chapter, and he told me to write until I felt like I was done. I did that for about 3.5 months, And when I felt like I was done, I handed it over to someone to help me put it into a book, someone locally here in Raleigh. And at that point, my day-to-day relationship with my writing had changed. I wasn't writing every day anymore, writing and crying and writing and crying, because it took me back into my grief journey, which was a really good thing for me because it helped me to remember and relate better to my clients. But what was I going to do now during this time? Well, the woman who was helping me put my book together said, this will give you time to figure out how you want to market your book and where you want to do your book events and what you want to say about it. And I said, I have to talk about my story now? I don't talk in front of people. I'm not a speaker. This isn't going to happen. I grew up with a severe stutter, and talking in front of people was my biggest fear. That's not going to happen. Well, it kept coming back. And so I found some people to work with to help me to embody my story. I worked with a voice coach to help me learn how to use my voice. I joined Toastmasters. And that first year, I traveled around the country and did somewhere between 12 and 16 book events. And after that first year, as I was reflecting on that experience, I thought, I really love talking about my story. I am a speaker. I want to do more of this. And I began to realize that the life that I was meant to live is going to continue to evolve as I do. That I wasn't going to reach a certain point and stay there. Each step along the way, when I got someplace, I was being called to do something greater. And I trust that that will continue as I continue on my journey. And my question to you is, wherever you are on your journey, whether you are on a grief journey or not, where is life calling you? What are you being called to step into? What is the next best version of yourself? Whatever it is, I hope that you say yes to yourself, because the world needs you to be you. Thank you.